Hello and welcome to the i3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography here at the School of Visual Arts. I'm Julie Grahame. Our guest tonight is Tim Soter, a photographer, artist, designer and publisher. Another person with whom I go back to the heydays of editorial photography when we worked together licensing his music and nightlife photos. Tim was always out shooting. He has never rested on his laurels, consistently producing interesting things, sometimes doing odd things, always being creative and just a teeny bit obsessive.
We will get into that.
As you will see, his work includes reportage and storytelling, book design and publishing. Shoots for many music magazines since the 90s includes working for Rolling Stone for over 10 years, driving across the country for Blender. He's photographed the president of Syria, spent an afternoon at Slash's house, you'll have to look him up, kids, and once had 9 seconds to shoot Daft Punk eating corn on the cob. And that is editorial for you. As well as shooting advertising for brands including Ford and Starbucks. Tonight, we will get an insight into his non-stop thought processes, how to go about making something unique, and why we might be making it. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Thank you, Julie, and thanks everybody for showing up. This is really nice. It's a little hot in here, which is good. It's going to be hot. So a little bit of backstory of what this talk will be like before we go into it. I'm going to give you a little backstory of what my college experience was like, what I was making there, and then what happened when I got out of school, came here, a little bit of my career path, and then we'll go through a bunch of books that I've made. Ideally, what I would like to have happen from this talk is it not be a talk where I'm like, look what I did. That's not the kind of talk I want to give. I would like to have a talk where hopefully you see something in my work or the process where you're like, ooh, that little thing is good. I could steal that. I could lift that. I could modify that and put it in my work. And you can lift, steal, do whatever you want. That's the way that art, making things, works. As your generation would say, no gatekeeping. So without further ado, 3 things that you might want to think about during this talk and that I like to pass on. My biggest thing is criteria. I think you can solve almost everything with criteria. Whether it's like, how much stuff should I bring on this trip that's coming up that I'm going to be at for like a week and a half, or what paper stock should I use for this book that I'm making. If you up front, and I'm going to use this mostly in terms of making books, set a really firm criteria. This book is about this book is for this person. What I want to get out of this book is this. Why I'm making this book is this. When you come across difficult questions like should this photo go in this book? You're kind of torn. You're obsessive. You might spend too much time in your own head trying to figure this out. If you bounce all of that stuff off of a really firm criteria that you made initially, the whole thing becomes a lot easier. And I'll give you an example or 2 of that as we go through. A big thing that I like to focus on is how do you make something special? You know, photography is unlike painting or drawing. You can make endless copies of something, and so are other people, and it's all on Instagram, and we see thousands of photos a day. So how do you make something special, especially how do you make photography special? You know, if you buy, you're making books, and the books cost you this amount of money, and you need to charge an extra this amount, and this amount is already a whole lot of money, how do you get people to buy your book and say, oh, this is worth it. This is worth spending X amount of dollars. And finally, don't afraid to get messy and go somewhere uncomfortable. This is advice that somebody gave me who I made a book about, and we'll get to him. But it's really difficult for me to get messy. I had sculpture class as an undergrad. I hated it. I hated getting stuff on my hands. Photography is clean and neat and tidy. Digitally, it made that even tidier. But when you get messier and you do things where you don't know where it's going and it looks kind of not great in your head or whatever, those are often the places where it takes you somewhere that actually turns out pretty interesting. So, little backstory, I went to a small school in Pennsylvania called Kutztown University, small state school. It was known for having a really good art department, great photography department. I still talk to both my professors now. And it was also known as the birthplace of Keith Haring, which is kind of a little bit of trivia. Clearly, everybody understood the assignment other than me, which was just throw in a photo of a senior photo. I went to the Allentown Art Museum and stood proudly in front of an Andy Warhol thing. But stand out, do your own thing. That's the point of this lecture, do your own thing. This whole talk is do your own thing. While I'm at school, most of the photography that I did started out as pretty straightforward. I would document my other fellow students who were all art majors doing kind of reportage photography. I loved a full format border and a really high contrast image because I loved Richard Avedon, and I was kind of, borrowing from the people who I was learning about in school. But I got to a point where I wanted to figure out a way to make photography unique or special or different than standard photography and go maybe closer to other mediums. So I started dragging a metal stylus across the negatives, or I was burning them and doing things like that, or I would put tissue paper down and put dried graphite bits around it when I would print through that, which was a technique I stole from Joel Peter Witkin, and we'll talk about him in a second. But here's an old negative that I was using so you can see what the process is like. That hair was accidental. I've always lived with a cat. But it got in there. It was great. It was just rubber cement that attracted the animal hair, and that just became another thing to print through. It was great. Cat gets credit. Here was another image from that time where you see I went to town. That bubbling up in the top was the bubbling of the emulsion when I set it on fire after putting rubber cement on it. So again, thinking about making things unique and special was something early on that I wanted to try and resolve or explore. My final project was not looking sad in clothes that didn't really fit me, but it was making a giant photograph. I got roll paper that was about 3.5 feet wide. I cut it down so there were 3 pieces. I put up safe lights in a classroom, and it took me all night, but I taped all of that up in the dark with the safe lights, then took enlarger and I aimed it like a projector at the image, did some test strips, and then with the help of a friend took them down one by one and hand sponged all of the developer on there, hand sponged all of the fixer. Took forever. We were there the entire night. At about 5 in the morning, I was so paranoid, I was convinced there were other people there, and I was getting really edgy being in the dark for too long. But it was a good solution as a final to make something unique and kind of work with that process. So influences. Biggest influence as a kid and for many, many years, and these will come back directly into my artwork, were comic books. I had a neighbor who lived downstairs from me when I was about 6, and he came up to my parents and said, "Look, I'm moving out. Do you think Timmy would like this giant box of comic books?" And praise Jah, my mother said yes, Timmy would love that. So he dumped off a bunch of these like late 60s, early 70s comic books that were fantastic. The colors were dazzling, the layouts, the design. I loved drawing at that point. And I held on to these for years in a big box. It'd be a rainy day. I would just pull them out, over the years and reread every single story. So I know all of these inside and out at a time when my brain was kind of still being formed, and they really became integrated into my imagination. Another thing that was probably my first attachment to photography was band photography. I loved this band New Order at a time where there weren't tons of magazines and a lot of things out there. Is obviously pre-internet, where you could find out about the band that you liked. So occasionally I would find a few postcards, when I was down in Ocean City, New Jersey on the boardwalk, and some store had them. Or I would find a unique article in a UK magazine, maybe at the mall, or this book came from like a college record store. So this was really the photography that I was engaging with and I was excited by and that I was collecting. The artwork for that music was also something that absolutely dazzled my brain. This is all still New Order artwork circa like 1989. Those photographs of the cherubs are actually Polaroids that were used, gelled lights were used to kind of make that. But it was the first time where I can absolutely guarantee you that the music sounds like that looks. And I thought that is so difficult to achieve. And I loved staring at that while listening to the music. It was fantastic. So I get to school. The main way you found out about photography when you weren't actually sitting in class at a lecture was the library. Again, pre-internet, we all knew exactly what books were in the library. We had good professors who were ordering these books. And these 5 books, let's say, were always in heavy rotation. If I didn't have the Joel Peter Witkin book, I knew that, excuse me, either Nadia or John had it. It was like we just kept, it was never in the library. It's like they didn't even own it. It was owned by 3 people for 4 years, was how that book went. So these are influences that you'll see will directly come back to the work that I made. First one up is a photographer named Dwayne Michaels. I like Dwayne's work a lot because it was different. Not only was he showing photographs, he was writing by hand on the print directly beneath the photo as a way to kind of add an extra narrative and show things that, in his explanation, could not simply be shown by showing you the photograph. So he was adding that text. He also was doing these sequential photos, which I hadn't seen anybody doing before. And I thought that was another way to make photography kind of different than maybe some standard street photography or something that I had seen. And the panels also kind of reminded me of comic books and that type of sequential storytelling. Joel Peter Witkin, he was the person who would do strange printing by scratching on the negatives or printing through tissue papers and things, so it would be selective focus in and out on the print. But he also had models who were pretty unique. He used taxidermied animals and would create these tableaus that had a connection to usually paintings of the past and a sense of history. The Starn brothers, I used to call them the Starn twins. I heard they don't like being called the Starn twins. I don't bump into them on the street, so I don't see how that's going to be an issue. The Starn brothers twins made this artwork. They would make multiple copies of a print. They would, kind of crudely assemble them with Scotch tape, non-archival Scotch tape, which I don't recommend. And they would make these truly unique photographs. That is a one-of-one photograph. It has a frame that also kind of ties it more to painting than photography. I like their work. Arthur Tress, he was a photographer. He is a photographer. He's still alive. But in this sequence, he was going out and finding random kids in the 70s to enact dreams, strange dreams that he had. So he had found this kid with his machine gun and asked him to go pose in this abandoned television. The 70s were really like that, by the way. Bruce Davidson. Bruce Davidson absolutely turned me on as a reportage photographer. Here he immersed himself with this Brooklyn gang called the Jokers. And I was so excited by thinking about, oh, I want to be with this subculture. I want to be with this subculture and be so close that you can't even believe that I'm that close. It just seems like that photo just existed, that somebody didn't take it. So I'm thinking about all these things, and I moved to Williamsburg in 1994. And Delmar's the first person I meet. I think I can meet all these photographers in Williamsburg. Guess what? They're all like this. They're not showing anybody their work. They're doing their own thing. I don't know what their problem was. No artists were mingling with artists that I knew. It was how it was. DJs were my friends, which was great. Delmar grew up out in Seattle. I grew up in Pennsylvania. He came over one day and we went through all my CDs and was so excited that I'm like, oh, this guy knows who Yellow is or The Art of Noise. Like we knew all these things that other people, even when I went to college, didn't know those bands, and Delmar did. So I started hanging out with Delmar and going to jungle and drum and bass nights and documenting the scene there. Oftentimes I was the only person with a camera. If you can imagine, can you imagine being at a place where the only person with a camera was amazing? Which was great. I was the photographer, she was the promoter, he was the DJ. Everybody had like their role. And I wanted to be there anyway. I mean, even if I didn't have a camera, I would still be there because I love that sound and that scene, but it was so exciting to photograph that and make pictures. It was like chocolate and peanut butter coming together. I'm like, I can't believe I get to do this. '90s fashion, back in style. I see it. It's comfortable. This eventually became an early publication called Electronic Music New York City, 1995, that a publisher in the north of England put out called Café Royale Books. So I'm going out all the time. I'm collecting. I like archival stuff. I like getting all the stuff because maybe later I'll do something with it, or I don't know, kind of an obsessive personality gather, and So I have all of these flyers still that I was acquiring during that time, and I'm spending a lot of time. I go to my day job. I maybe take a little nap. I go out all night and I photograph these things. During that time, I get a job as the house photographer, so to speak, at a giant club called Twilo that was over on the west side. And it was great. It was a massive club. Again, I would go to my day job. I would set the alarm. I'd wake up at like midnight, kind of freaked out, not knowing where I was. I had to grab my camera. I'd race over the west side. And there, oftentimes, I was the only person with a camera. The owners were paranoid that somebody would come in and possibly photograph someone doing drugs at the club. So they had to vet me in order to get there. They were suspicious of me. And I said, look, I'm going to take this roll. I'm going to go to the lab. I'm going to be back in like 2 hours. You will count and see there are 36 photos there. I have not removed any. Everything's cool. And after that little vetting process, I became the photographer at Twilo. So I'm amassing all of these slides, like I just mentioned. I shot on slides back then because digital wasn't invented yet, but really also because you could make duplicate slides very easily. So if a magazine or something wanted an image, since you couldn't scan it, you would make a duplicate of that slide and mail it off to them. But I started putting together a pretty good archive of this one specific niche thing, which is actually how I met Julie at Retina, the agency, like she said, who is representing this work. I made a list of everybody who came to town, every DJ that I had photographed rather. If they weren't on the list, I made sure that I would go out that night and photograph them. At some point, I didn't want to do this anymore, but I was so obsessive that I didn't want somebody to take my place. I actually had to see a therapist to stop doing this. That is not even a joke. I literally needed to be talked off the ledge of doing this thing because I had done it for so long and I didn't want somebody to get my spot. But it did make for quite a nice archive. Around this time, I make up a website. This is in 2000. All those buttons were made in Photoshop. Photoshop. Every little square, Photoshop. So this was a way that people could find me. I actually scored the name djphotos.com. I let that go. Thank you to the therapist who allowed me to let that domain sail on. But it was a way to see the work that I was doing, although it was about this big because that's how long it took. Anything bigger would take a day to load. Also, at that point, people were paranoid. Like, what if somebody steals my image? Can you imagine someone stealing your tiny little image? So it showed who I shot for, how to get in touch, and those kind of things. And out of that grew kind of a bigger music career. I left my full-time job as a photo editor, and I started shooting full-time, mostly shooting music, which I really loved. It was obviously, given what I've said, a very natural, logical progression. And I really enjoyed it. Amy Winehouse, I was sent to photograph this woman who I didn't know who she was. They're like, oh, there's a new venue that's coming up. We want you to shoot like you're in the audience and you're just kind of showing the venue. And it's this woman, Amy Winehouse. I don't know, she's new. So I got to see her. She was amazing. She sang like it was effortless. She really was that incredible. So I did this for a number of years and really, really enjoyed that aspect. The aforementioned Daft Punk eating corn on the cob. There's a time jump here. That photo on the top is actually Daft Punk at Twilo, the nightclub I was shooting at, before they wore helmets. I was told not to take a picture of them. I clearly took a picture of them. Sometimes you have to just do it and know that it's for the greater good much later down the road. I don't think it's a great photo, but there they are. And then years later, they performed, believe it or not, out at Coney Island, where the Brooklyn Cyclones play in that little arena. And it was a great show, but I honestly had 9 seconds to photograph them. And as soon as we were done, they dropped what they were doing and they just went right out on stage and started performing. I will say I was freaking out because the autofocus on the camera was looking for something sharp to pick up to focus, and it just kept hitting their surface, their curved visors, and going in and out and in and out, and the sweat is coming down. And 9 seconds. So I'm sure you've all been in that situation, or you will be. You will be. Tear sheets, that's what we acquired as music photographers, or photographers really in general. And those were things you would literally tear out of the magazine that had your photos. And you would collect these in a little book and be able to show people like, oh, these are the magazines I've been in. Buy me a drink later, I'll tell you many great stories about Kanye. Many stories about Kanye. So maybe around 2011, for some reason that photographer Dwayne Michaels popped back into my head. I don't know, I hadn't thought about his work in a while, and it just kind of came back, and I thought, oh, I wonder what Dwayne is up to. I knew he lived in New York City. So I watched a YouTube little documentary on him that said I think it said where he's on East 19th Street. It gave his address, not his full address, just the street that he lived on, but not the number. So one day I decided to just walk up that entire street looking to see where the buzzer was that I kind of remembered from the YouTube video. It took me a long time, and I found his apartment. I got his address, and I decided to write him a letter. I don't want to read this letter ever again in my life. It's embarrassing. But I put it in this book that became Tim Go Away. So Tim Go Away is a book about Dwayne Michaels by Tim Soter. So this book really was something I was making as a book dealing with obsession. When you're kind of obsessed with the idea of somebody, or somebody who is a creative hero, something like that, how do you show that in photography? Frida Mareb, she'll be in this lecture soon. So there's the East 19th Street address. I think this was taken maybe that day when I first went to visit him, and I took a picture of it and then made a cheap printout at Staples. I'm going to mention cheap color Xeroxes or cheap black and white laser prints, because they're an excellent way to fool around and experiment. They don't cost you a lot, and they're really fun. So I was trying to figure out ways to tell this story, again thinking about Dwayne's work where he wrote underneath the photos and used different techniques. I was trying to solve that. So I had this cloud of smoke coming out of the buzzer. I blackened out everybody else's names on the buzzer, so it would be only his name, and laid out the text there. I did meet him initially from sending him that letter, and we talked for about an hour and a half at his place, and I said, oh, he's like, what time is it? I said, I don't know, 5 o'clock. He's like, oh, you've got to go, you've got to go. I said, will you just sign a book or two? And he said, sure, and he snatched this book and he just wrote, Tim, go away, and he handed it back to me. So I had that book and a bunch of other things in the layout for this book, and I didn't have a title for the book. And people would laugh about 7 or 8 pages in, and I said, what are you laughing at? And they said, Tim, go away. So the public decided that title. I was like, that's a good title. We're gonna use that. So the book are different cards and things that I had sent to him. I would scan them in before I sent to him at some point, maybe loosely thinking this was going to be a project, but that wasn't really maybe the goal initially. But the book had a lot of unusual things I wanted to work out. I spent a small fortune buying one of his prints. It's the most amount of money I ever spent on a photograph. And after I saw it, I bought it. It went back to the gallery for him to sign it. And when it came back to me, I gave it straight to my friend who is a framer. A few months later, it came back to me, and I noticed there was a dent. If you can see a little ding in there, a little ding over here. And I was like, hey, I paid a lot of money for this thing. Like, what is that ding? And I called the gallery, and I knew what they'd be like. Yeah, that was months ago. Like, who knows where that, you can't put that on us. So I wrote 1,000 words called The Dent on what I thought must have happened or might have happened, where that dent came from. Obsession on top of obsession. This book really is about that type of thinking. Years later, I would find out I was correct. It was his elbow. Because I saw him sign other things, and the way where he rested his hand, he was the denter. So, other things that show obsession, I took used an extreme macro lens to photograph his handwriting, since his handwriting is such a part of his work. He always uses a quill and ink. So you can see there where that's a D and a U, but the ink didn't fully come out of the quill on the U, but the metal dragged into the paper and kind of scored it. So you can see that. So I was trying to think of all solutions of how do you show that kind of macro obsession that you have with someone's work. I did meet him at different openings and things throughout the years and implemented that. He has a pretty decent sense of humor. And then the conclusion for this book was my own idea. I said, I like a book that has, all the books that I do, most of the books that I do, have a story. There's some sort of narrative and it needs a conclusion, like a movie or a story. You need some sort of ending to a narrative. This narrative I invented was, I surmised that if he were to look at this book at the end, he'd say, okay, great. It's your time now to kill the Buddha, which is an old Zen expression. You fetishized me and built me up through my books and my words and that kind of stuff. But now it's time for you to leave all this behind and make things about you. And I thought that was advice that truly I was making up, that I thought he would give to me. But it was advice that I was also giving back to myself. Like, you can only be a fan for so long. A lot of my work deals with kind of fandom or mythologizing things. But there is a risk that if you do that too long, it's never going to be really about you. It's going to be about you exalting other people's work. So I make this book. There are only 50 copies. I think each book I did digital offset printing over at Conveyor Arts. And I think each book cost me $44. So that's without labor or having somebody who I asked to help flow in the text and things like that. That's just literally what the book cost me. But I need to charge something more on top of that because I want to earn some sort of potential profit. So I forget what I charged. Maybe it was like $68. Now that starts getting a little pricey. How are you going to expect people to pay $68 for your book? You know, you really, that's part of making things, or certainly making books, is like you got to sell those things realistically. You will quickly run out of family members, you'll find them. So one of the ways that I thought you could do that is I would take one of his books, this little tiny book down here, and I would take out all of the pages and I put them on this roll of archival, it's basically archival double-sided tape. You can buy this at a store called Talas, T-A-L-A-S. So I put them all down there and cut them all out, and then in every copy of each book, at the front plate of each book, I put a different page from one of those books, and I crimped my little name in there, Tim Soter, at the bottom. And so if I knew you and you bought this book from me online and it was time to ship it to you, I would go through the whole stack of books and I'd be like, oh, what would Julie like? And I'd go through and I'd find one that I thought like matched your personality. Because it's really not about money. Like, as anyone who's been in books long enough will tell you, it's very difficult to make money selling books. So really, see it all the way through is my advice. Right down to the very end. Enjoy that process. You've made the thing. The best thing is somebody actually bought your book. They're excited to get it. See that all the way through and make it as special as possible. The way you would want to get something, you know. It sounded like my mother was saying that. But the way you'd want to be treated, everybody. That's not the way I want to be. Wasn't going there. For the second edition, I printed just 50 more. There are only 2 editions of this book. I knew Dwayne better at this point, and I said, hey, will you give me a print, a signed print? I have this project. And he said, yeah, OK. So this is the print he chose to give me. It's his photograph. He signed it at the bottom. I took it home, and I cut it up into 50 pieces. And so there are 50 books. There's 50 pieces here. And I thought, OK, the second edition, if you buy this book, you get to say, oh, I've got a Dwayne Michaels print. And you get a little print in that book. To ensure that it was random what piece you got, because if I'm looking at this, I would definitely want, you know, a signature. Part of his signature down there would be one of the better pieces. I numbered all the pieces 1 through 50 in a little glass jar So the first person to order a book, I would pluck the number out of the glass jar, and they got whichever corresponding number had that print in it. And all of those little pieces were there affixed in the back of the book in a little tiny gold envelope. That cost me almost nothing. Jam Paper Store online. Love Jam, yes. Used to be physical here. Still online, still have good stuff. That's where that gold envelope came from. But again, that's more of an idea, and it didn't cost me a lot. But I would think if you bought this book and you're a fan of his, and going back to fandom, you'd be pretty excited to like take your little Dwayne Michaels print out of there. That was my solution. So around this time I'm making this book, I'm at the PS1 Art Book Fair, which is coming back to PS1. It hasn't been there in the last few years, but they announced that this fall it's going to be back over there at MoMA PS1. I'm at the book fair, I'm looking down at the table, different books. I see this big book, it says Arthur Tress. It's like skateboard photographs. I can't figure it out. I'm looking at it. There's a young woman behind the table, and I said, hey, is this the Arthur Tress? I said, how old is he? And she just went like this. She went. I was like, oh. And then I looked over, and this guy's there. And I said, I'm sorry. I said, are you Arthur? And he said, he's got a great classic, lovely Jewish New Yorker voice. He's like, oh, yes. Do you know my work? And I'm like, yeah, you're part of the history of photography, Arthur. And he's like, oh, thanks. And we talked for a while. And he's like, he was visiting. He lived out in Big Sur for a long time, ex-New Yorker. And he said, oh, I'm in town for a little while. Would you like to come and take some photographs out at Coney Island? And I was like, yeah, let's do that. It was great. So Arthur and I went out to Coney Island taking pictures, and that became the start of an actual friendship with this person whose work I absolutely loved, you know, when I was a student. And it became this book, which is called Fortress. So that's actually a shot from that first day when we went out to Coney Island. He later said, oh, that was a little difficult for me. I have to admit, I was trying to impress you. I know, he's sweetest guy, truly, but also creatively unparalleled imagination and great ideas, which you will see further in this talk. So with this book, I decided to get a little looser. I was doing things with collage. Again, go to any place that has inexpensive color laser prints offered, maybe here at school, and print out a bunch of your photos and start cutting things up and gluing things together and enjoying that process. Part of the text was our text. We would text back and forth or email. And the other part of it was an interview that I conducted. This is an email. This is the entire body of the email. Hi, I just had some dental surgery, so my mouth is sore, so I will call you now. This is the kind of stuff I enjoyed, loved. I would love getting, I'm glad this wasn't all in caps as a bonus. But he had some good ideas. He said at some point in every book that I make, there's always a point in the middle where I think, what is this? Like, where is this going? Is this garbage? Is this something? I don't know that this is something. And so I shared that with him, and he said, oh, I'm going to send you some of my books. I want you to cut those up and use them. So that kind of boy in that carriage that's setting on his head is actually one of Arthur's photos that I've cut out and collaged and stuck onto him. We would take photo walks. This is in Greenpoint, but I really enjoyed being even more loose with the layout of this book. Part of the criteria, going back to criteria, is I want a book that's exciting and kind of worth it. I have this thing called the spine test, where if you've got a bunch of books, photo books on your wall, you should see the spine of one book after about 3 or 4 years after you bought it and think, oh, I haven't looked at that in a while, and like want to pull it off the shelf. That's a very difficult test. I'm not saying my books pass that test, but it's a bar to set to be like, yeah, this is a book. You're supposed to want to revisit this over and over. It shouldn't just be like, I bought it at the fair, and then that was kind of the last interaction, you know, a week later that you ever had with that book. So part of the criteria, spine test. I stayed with him for about a week and a half, which was great, out in Big Sur. It was beautiful there. And we just get up and kind of do our own thing, which was awesome. He'd do his photography, I'd do my thing. This interview that I conducted with him, here he's talking about his connection to the water. I thought this was funny. This is about 10 years ago. Now I've got some sweatshirts that are getting into that category as like phase into old man territory. So I get it. Stop somebody on the street at the end of shooting one day on one of our walks and said, hey, will you just document this, take our picture? And he handed the camera back to me and I didn't realize, like, oh my God, we're dressed exactly alike. Like, I think I'm becoming this guy. It was ridiculous. So really enjoyed playing around with collage because, again, going back to my excitement for like comic books and things being really dynamic and exciting and not just kind of staid, I was playing around and just having fun, cutting things up. I showed him some things that I was doing because I was concerned, like, what if he looks at this and says, what are you doing? That's my face. You know, like, that's a legitimate question to ask someone. But he's so gracious that he said no. He's like, you should really, I got to stop doing his voice. He said, no, you should really not self-censor. I'm really kind of against that. You should just be free to see where your mind takes you, and you're not going to offend me. You know, that's what you're doing. So I narrowed it down to this one photo. There's one page, one layout in the book that has this picture in it, and I started playing around with doing things on this one image, which is one page in the book. And that led me to an offshoot, a limited edition of this book, where there were 32 copies. The way this came about is he came over. I said, hey, can you sign some books? And he signed about 32 of them, and that's what was there. And I said, oh, let's call it quits. So I decided that I was going to draw or paint on this one page in each one of these 32 books. It was very liberating because I was a frustrated drawer or painter. It's something I loved as a kid and then got self-conscious about and didn't really get to go back to because that self-conscious thing was kind of trapping me. So this made me do this thing and be free. But also, it made me live with it. Because if I screwed up number 8 of 32, I couldn't just chuck that book or like tear the page. Like I had to live with it. So it took me a year and a half to do 32 of these because I would open it up and make some marks, and then I'd pace all around the living room, and I'd be like, what are you going to do now? Like that's not, you know. So it was a real process. But in the end, when I was done with the very last one, I was sad because I did actually miss it. I hadn't realized how much I was loving it while it was going on. Criteria, we went back to criteria and how you solve things. The paper this was printed on is an uncoated stock, meaning it's not glossy or anything. There's no coating on it. It's just really thick, wonderful paper. I made that decision way early on when I was putting this book together because I had this idea way early on that I wanted to be able to draw in the book or make marks in there. At the nth hour, when I had to tell the printer in Istanbul in an email, like, which paper are we going to go with? Like, are you going to go with the, they would send tests and stuff. I had the tests all spread out. Are you going to go with this like slightly glossy paper? Are you going to go with the matte paper? And I just paced around the apartment for like 2 or 3 hours. I couldn't figure out like which it was going to be. I had this imposter syndrome. If it's on this kind of matte paper, maybe it won't really look like a photography book. And it was killing me. And at some point, right before midnight, I needed to make this decision. I was like, yeah, remember you wanted to draw on this book and that's why you chose uncoated paper? Ding! And that was it. I never thought about it again. I stopped obsessing. That was it. And it was because I bounced it back on that criteria that I had kind of clearly set early on. So that's one of the things I recommend you implement. Here's a body of work I did in the early 2000s, which I shot this without a criteria. I was a working photographer. I'm shooting all that music stuff, but I always had a little Olympus stylus camera in my pocket. It's great, 35, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It's such a good camera. But I was taking these photos without thinking anybody would ever see them because everything else was going into magazines or it was a hustle. I just made these because I liked making them, and that was about the end of it for a while. I just kept accruing these 4x6 prints, and that was always the process. Take the roll, drop it off, and get these nice beautiful white border 4x6 prints. So after many years of shooting like this, I noticed what my criteria was after the fact, and I narrowed down hundreds and hundreds of photos to about 60 photos that I, called The Ship Escaped, based on a photo that I'd taken that kind of looked like that. But the criteria that I noticed was happening was I liked things that were kind of dryly funny, had a little humor to them. I liked something that happens all the time is when humankind and nature kind of come together, like this one, or the George Washington Bridge down there. I didn't know these things while I was shooting. I just shot freely and then later figured it out, which honestly I'm so happy that that kind of happened accidentally, because it just let me do what I wanted to do, and then I could see what the results were. So Arthur's over at my house one day, and he's going through my stuff, and he's like, oh, I see you like your comic books over here, and your 4x6 photos. And so he just starts doing this thing where he's like, what if you did this? What if you took your 4x6 prints and you set them down on top of the comic book covers and kind of did something with those? Here I've made us tea. Julie says that's the worst cup of tea ever made. As a Brit, I understand. I'm sorry to offend anyone in the room. So he's giving me this idea, and I'm listening to him, but in my back of my head, I'm like, I'm never going to do that. That's the dumbest idea. Like I really instantly rejected it for whatever reason and just pushed it out of my head. And I put off that idea for about a year. And then one day, and I don't know what made me try that idea out like a year later, but I started doing it, and I did them all in one afternoon and did about 50 of them and totally loved that process. So here you can see like that eye is really reminiscent of that guy's eye down in the lower corner. But also there's kind of like a weird funkiness to it. The color palette all kind of blends together. And to me, it was like a success. So sometimes it's just really mirroring something that's going on in the periphery, on the comics. But other times, to me, they're kind of funny. Like, at last, the return of the original Iron Man, who's like this old filing cabinet. A one-eyed cat and a one-eyed cat. So this became a book I put together. This is maybe the first book I think I ever made. I made it through Blurb, and it was expensive. You know, if you get one of those big giant books through Blurb, I chose the thickest paper possible, and I don't know, the books cost me about $100 and some, and I wanted to sell them for like $150. So whatever it was a very, very thin margin of profit there. So I only made 10 of these books. Again, I'm just starting out. I'm trying to figure this out. And I realized that they sold out, actually. They sold out in like 2 months or something. And then I was like, oh, that sucks. Like, you should have made a bigger edition, because now you've got to figure out another way to reprint this in a different style, so the first people that bought an edition of 10 don't feel like, oh, they were taken advantage of. So I haven't reprinted this yet, and there are only 10. There is one that is in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in the Watson Library, which is located underneath the Met Museum. If you've ever been there, ever don't know about this, you know about this?
I was just there 5 minutes ago.
Oh, 5 minutes ago, that's great.
Yeah, it's on the ground floor.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. They have literally over 1 million books below the Metropolitan Museum. Anyone can go in there, do research, check books out. It's a great resource. So this is the most recent published project that I've done. It's not this book. I got a call about this book right before the pandemic started. So this book, Meet Me in the Bathroom, is about this thick. It's a massive tome, an oral history about the downtown music scene in New York in the early, mid-2000s. So it chronicles bands like The Strokes, or LCD Sound System, or The Rapture, or the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, on and on and on. So somebody in the UK was doing a documentary about this book, and they said, hey, I've seen a bunch of your photos online. Do you have more stuff like the stuff that I've seen that we could look at? So I dug through my archive. Most of it was physical, and I just started finding all of those bands that this person had mentioned, scanning them in, and sending them to him to see what he might like to use for the documentary. In that process, I found that I had the whole history of one particular record label that started called DFA Records. DFA Records is the home to, like I said, LCD Sound System, The Rapture, Black Dice, a bunch of other bands. But I had photographed them from like 2003 to 2007. And I thought, oh, maybe there's enough here to make a book. Normally what I do is if I have something like this, I'll take all the photos I have, dump them into one giant layout, and see if I have enough. If I do have enough, then I'll start chipping away at what shouldn't be in there based on the criteria. In this case, the criteria was, I want this book to be made for a fan, the ultimate fan of this record label. The way that I loved those early New Order books and postcards and things that I couldn't get enough of, I wanted to do that for somebody whose favorite bands were on this record label. Letra Muerta actually designed that cover. I collaborated with Farida Mareb, who's in the back of the room tonight. And it was the first time, she did a fantastic job. She gave me 40 covers to choose from. She nailed it. But it was the first time. I always want to do something different every time I do a book. So for this book, I went to the printer in Istanbul and stayed there and had the pages brought to me, and you get to be like, it's not contrasty enough, blah, blah, blah. But also, I had done all the covers myself, and I wanted to work with somebody who I knew would be fantastic and see what their interpretation would be. So fun to put this book together. Once again, cheap color Xeroxes. Keep coming back to that. This was the last thing that I did. These are the end papers. The first thing you see when you open the book is this collage. Sometimes people forget about end papers. Sometimes you'll open up a visual book and maybe it's just like blank white or a color. That's, to me, is an awesome place to put something really interesting. It's also the first thing people are going to see. So something to keep in mind. Another criteria I had for making this book was, if you met me in the last 15 years, you would have zero idea I used to photograph a ton of music. Like I've done a lot of other things since then, and I don't really shoot music anymore. And I wanted a record that would be on hand that would show people like, yeah, I used to do this a lot. This is also during an era where film photographers were gradually making their way over to digital photography. So there's a whole bunch of different cameras and digital photography and film photography being used at the same time. I would bring maybe 4 or 5 cameras to the shoot because I had a lot of time hanging around, and I wanted to make it look as exciting as possible when I was photographing them. They had hired me to do their press photos. So I had this great Polaroid Spectra that had these cheap little filters you would drop in front, and they do multiple exposures and things like that. For the narrative of the book, because the book can't just be a fan book, I wanted to have a story and kind of be about me as well. It's subtly about me. I found an old Hotmail account that I still remember the password to, and I printed out a bunch of emails and photographed them, so in the book they'd have more of a texture. It wouldn't look like it was just laid out. And here is actually the very first email I sent to the record label. It says, hey, I want to be the guy who shoots all these people. And when they ask for a photo, it's my photo they send out. And it's a really bold ask from like 20-some years ago. But it worked out. All it took was an email. Somebody said yes, and that's how that got sorted out. Again, working with Farida. She helped lay out the text. I had made this design where I took their logo as a lightning bolt. I had given her a sketch where it looked like this, but I broke up the lightning bolt into 2 bits that were facing like this. And she said, yeah, why don't we just put this back together? Shoot! And the book is like this. And I was like, oh, that's why she's the designer. So went to a lot of shows that they were doing. I loved, obviously, doing live concert photography. Here's a perfect example of using criteria. I had this photo in the book. It occupies a 2-page spread. It takes up 2 full pages of this book. And I was like, I don't know if I should use this photo or not. Most of my books are like kind of the greatest hits. I want every photo to be kind of awesome. This photo isn't necessarily awesome on its own, but I had to go back to the criteria. The criteria was, would a fan like this photo? Does it make sense to the person whose this book is designed for? And the answer was yes. It shows a space back in Williamsburg where there were tons of these spaces and warehouses were cheap. It shows 2 band members from Black Dice and Animal Collective talking to each other, and a little bit of fashion of the time and things like that. So it actually met all of the criteria, and it stayed in the book. And it was easier for me to make that decision. Several pages are like this. Again, it's a dialogue between me and the record label manager talking to each other, and that becomes the story of the book. Here I'm asking him, is there a guest list tonight? And he's like, it's $5. I think you can swing that. I had a lot of time when I was hanging out with them, waiting for them to show up, so I would just absentmindedly shoot The Office, which is great because now you get to see that terrible giant old iMac from the past. Or the fact that like this is 3 days before they ever had a first album out, and now they're huge and they play big residencies all over the world. I tell you this because sometimes it's tough to take pictures of things and think about what they could be used for or might be valuable for in the future. You know, I didn't know that I would ever do this book. Maybe you see a movement that's going on and you think, oh, I like social documentary photography, but why would I cover that? Like, I see a lot of photographers who are doing that. Everybody's covering that. You have no idea that your way isn't totally different than their way. Or you shoot the thing and 20 years later, you're going through your stuff and you're like, wow, this wasn't as covered as I thought. You know, not everybody out there was shooting this thing. So shoot freely and archive your stuff so you know where to find it later. Behind the scenes photos, again, shooting freely. That guy I was talking to in all of the emails, this is the only photo that I had of him, and I was sweating one night being like, I don't think I took a single photo of the label manager, and I did manage to have just one, which is all I needed. Here's a show where I decided to concentrate more on the audience than being up front and taking the band photos with a small kind of cheap digital camera. And it was great. Really got the energy and what it was like, and the layout, I think, I did the layout for the book. The layout, I think, kind of gives that rhythm of what the energy is like. It pays to print with good people. When I was in Istanbul, at the very last second, they noticed that this photo is the same as that photo on the bottom right. And I smartly brought a hard drive with me with all extra photos. And I swapped that out for a way much better photo because that would have driven me absolutely nuts. But they caught it, and I had the backup, so it all went well. Camera that had double exposure, in-camera double exposures, which was fun. Point-and-shoot camera with a fixed 21mm lens. Little point-and-shoot, but think about how absolutely wide that is. And that the flash on my camera really is like going to the back. Like, that's amazing. The camera's like this big. Shout out to Rico. And so the book ends with some party photos that, yeah, kind of a Gary Winogrand style is the way I was thinking when I was shooting. I loved Gary Winogrand. Again, what would a fan really want? They'd want an interview with the band. So I got 3 of the members of the Rapture, individually went to their places, interviewed all of them, and then assembled them into this interview, because I thought that a fan would want to know, like, they've got all the juicy bits of what that time period was like. They've got the stories. I had to put together a discography of their work, the band's, from 2002 to 2007. This didn't just exist in one place on the internet. I had to hunt and find it and smush it all together. And Farida painstakingly laid this out. She said this was a crime. It was difficult to lay this out. OK, how do you make a book special? This is right before the holidays. I'm selling these things. I said, anybody buys this book, you get a free 4x6 print. I actually found the negative. I ran it through machine printer and went back to the process that I like, those white bordered 4x6 glossy prints. And I taped a print in the back of every book and said, this exists only until the holidays, and then next year, no print. I found that putting that in there and seeing it when I was done and stuff, and I'm like, oof, all of the books should have this in it. It looks so good and it completes it. And what? That print cost me like 30 cents. But the value of it, when you open up this book and you get a nice little print, is so much more than obviously what the material cost is. So I created this print for all subsequent time after the first print. So if you got it before the end of the previous year, you got a different photo. If you get this on my site now, every book comes with this photo. I also did this thing where I took tear sheets. These are some old tear sheets from back in the day, 2000 something or other. Scanned them in, went to MagCloud. Have you ever used MagCloud at all? And made these kind of fake facsimile tear sheets. Those are all double-sided. And I tear them out, fold them in half, and I just stick them in the back of every book if you buy a copy. I think I actually have a copy now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it looks like this. So I just kind of slip this in the back as a bonus. I don't think I mentioned it on the website. It's just like a bonus if you get the book. You're like, oh, what's this? And you get this tear sheet. It's nice because it has the one on the right, the back side, the one on the right, has a listing of all the clubs and the descriptions and stuff from that era. So it really sets the time period. When I send out a book, definitely overseas, I will I always handwrite everything. I might tape on some color laser prints there. I love writing a handwritten note because I want them to open this stuff and be like, oh, this is exciting. Also, they pay, if somebody orders this like they did in Australia, they pay like literally the cost of the book in shipping just to get it. So it's like double the price. So I want to add in some value of like, hey, if you're getting this thing, like you're really getting the full package. Also, once again, it's not about making money. Nobody's going to make a ton of money in books. It's really about the pleasure of it. OK, so this is the very finale. This is a new project I've worked on that's not realized. This is the end. But just something I wanted to share because I haven't talked about this work really with other people before. But harkening back when I just got out of school, I moved to the city. I wanted to collect photography books, but they were very expensive, and I didn't have a lot of money. I wasn't earning a lot of money. So I'd go to the Strand, and I'd buy auction house catalogs from Christie's or Sotheby's because they had great photography in them, and they were like dirt cheap. Some of them, I realized, were just one person's collection. So over on the right there is the Robert Mapplethorpe collection. After he died, his estate cataloged all of his items, put them up for sale. But the catalog itself, to me, was like a pretty awesome photography book. Another way of thinking about a photography book doesn't just have to be, a monograph. Here's 40 photos by one photographer. They're all square, this kind of thing. There's a lot of different ways of looking at what a photography book might be. So I thought this was great. He had the wonderful Keith Haring vase. And I started thinking about the idea of catalogs and ephemera and that being a photography book. Here is another auction house catalog that's more recent, 2019, and it's by the bass player of New Order, the band I mentioned at the start of this talk. This one I thought was really exciting because he's selling off his instruments that were used to make the music that I absolutely loved. Like those wind chimes were used in a Joy Division song that starts off with the song. And I thought, but it did not sell for 500 pounds. It sold for a lot more than that. But if you're over at my house and I just went, hey, this one, and just like did the wind chimes, anybody who is a Joy Division fan or from a certain era would be like, oh my God, I'd be like, yeah. So I thought that was a great idea for a catalog. And he also, and this is the key part, the key point, would have these amazing stories attached. He's a great writer, attached to the item. So it wouldn't just be like, here's my bass, it's selling for this amount of money. This is actually the first bass guitar, he's a bass player, that he ever owned. And his story says, the morning after seeing the Sex Pistols, I went to Mazel's in Piccadilly and bought this, my first bass guitar, for 35 borrowed pounds from my mother. I couldn't afford a case because I needed money for bus fare home. So he tells the guy, and the guy's like, sure, here's some trash bags you can put your bass in. And he goes on to tell about how he plugged it into a neighbor's stereo, promptly blew up the stereo. Whoa. But they're all great stories that go along with each item. And I thought, oh, that's so inventive as a photography book. I know that he's not looking at it like a photography book, but I certainly am. So here's my apartment. I've collected a lot of ephemera and items over the years, things that I enjoy, books, memorabilia, and stuff like that. But I'm actually at a point where I don't need all those things anymore, and I don't want all those things. I know that I only have a certain amount of time more. This isn't a diagnosis. I'm just saying I'm not 22. I only have a certain amount of time. If my mother is watching this, it's okay. I'm going to be okay. I only have a certain amount of time to make things. And I want to collect less, curate things less. I want to make things. So I want to get rid of some of this stuff. But I also want to be able to say, I owned this stuff. I collected this stuff. There's a reason. So I've been photographing, where I've photographed a bunch of that stuff with this idea. I'm going to make a fake catalog for myself. It's going to be a fake posthumous catalog, as if I died already. So it's my estate that's offering my stuff up because I'm, in the great beyond. But each one has a story. So here I've given it a lot number. I say what the book title is. I give an estimated value of $125 to $150. And then how do I tell the story if I'm already dead? So below that is a fake interview that I have done sometime in the past. This one says, I talked to Details magazine in December of 1998 in an article that was called Warhol Continues to Launch 1,000 Ships. And it's me talking about when I came to New York as a teenager and went to a bookstore and found this Andy Warhol book that was signed by Ultraviolet, one of the members of the factory, his crew. So continuing in the Warhol vein, this is Gerard Malanga. He was the guy, he's still alive, who did all the silkscreen pulling for Warhol. I met him when I was in high school. He came to a little town near me. And it's a long story of something embarrassing that I did, and he kind of let me off the hook in front of him. I wasn't embarrassing. I was embarrassed by like, I'm doing this thing. And he's like, good for you. But I said, oh, will you sign something for me? And I gave him like the little flyer, and he just signed it however many, 6 times. He just kept signing it in a very Warholian fashion, which like blew me away. So I write all about this story, and again, it's part of that fake Details magazine story, and I've given it an estimate of like $600 to $650, and I'm treating it like the catalog. But it's not all highbrow stuff. There's some really obsessive stuff, and I'm going to leave you with this, because this really is the most obsessive thing. For a while, this is probably 10 or 12 years ago, I really wore a ton of navy blue shirts. And I would, without telling anybody or really thinking about it, other than just doing it, I would have 2 stacks in my drawer. One were like the really good navy blue shirts, and the others were like ones that were like slightly faded. And when I would get up in the morning, I'm like, oh, is this like a really good navy blue shirt day, or is this like a faded? And I'd really have to think about this and think about like, who am I going to see today? And I'd really like weigh which navy blue shirt it was going to be. And I used to actually, at some point I couldn't really tell well enough which were which. So I started writing in Sharpie on the tag in the t-shirt the date that I bought them, so I could figure out more clearly which was the correct navy blue t-shirt, until J. Crew got wise to me and just started printing it on the t-shirt, screwing up my idea. So I had to figure out my way out of that, but this is also part of the posthumous catalog, is showing part of my collection, my way of thinking, my personality. And so I get to tell this whole story and list these t-shirts for sale as part of the auction that my estate is giving up. So hopefully this idea gives you something to think about or work through in your own world. Hopefully you can see that all of the work that I've done is really personal. And that's the stuff that people want to see anyway. They really want to see like, that's really you. Like nobody can replicate that. It's very cliche. But it is true. Like that's the stuff that really makes the best work. It's like the stuff that is truly, truly you in there. So thanks. thanks for coming, and I enjoyed talking to you. Thanks.
I was really touched, or it really spoke to me about the criteria. One, how do you limit the criteria? How do you curate the criteria so that you don't end up with a list that becomes meaningless? How do you make it
defeating
meaningful?
the point of the criteria.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Criteria gets its own criteria. That is true. That's a good obsessive question. That's why I say that really it isn't easy. Like you think it'd be, or you may think it would be easy to just say, oh yeah, I know what this book is about. Like it makes sense. It's like a music book with these bands in it or something. But it's difficult, and you actually have to spend time like really chipping away at it and making sure that that criteria is tight. I think it's fun, and that's why I don't mind spending the time thinking about it for a week, you know, and because I already like making the thing, and like I know the criteria is going to help me, but it just helps me get excited about the thing that I'm making, so I don't mind tightening up the criteria so it just doesn't become too long of a list, because I'm excited to make the thing.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions? We also take comments. Don't make me glare.
Thanks, Julie. Tim, that was absolutely incredible.
Thanks. The air
Just
conditioning will
incredible.
be on in 20 minutes.
You know, I just want to, it's amazing. You blew my mind with this presentation. It's fantastic.
Thanks.
I just wanted to ask you, what did you do after you catalog your things? What did you do with the things afterward?
That is another good question. This project has been going on for a little bit, and that is true. The goal is to like move a lot of it along because I don't need it. If it's in the catalog, I get to have my cake and eat it too, I feel. But I've kind of put this off because, or put the catalog off, because it just takes so much time. It's definitely like a winter project, and I didn't get to it this winter. It's actually really a pandemic project where you're like forced to be in your house and like photograph, because it's not just shooting, it takes a long time to write those stories and things. So I've put it off for a little bit because I think there are some other books that are more active that need to come ahead of that book. And I want to do that book because I want to get the stuff out, which is your question. But I know that even more than that, I've got other books that kind of are in front of that need to be made before that. So it's kind of difficult.
So, excuse me, just
Hang on a sec, Dustin.
Yeah,
Just for the tape.
I'm sorry, just to add to that.
Yeah.
So you're saying you never got rid of the things?
I did not get rid of the things. I had to really think. Like, I was like, did I get rid of some of the things? I didn't really get rid of the things yet.
It's hard to part with the things.
It's true. It gets easier, I think, as you, yeah, it's true.
Okay, thank you.
How do you get away from the conventional view of making money from something? How do you give that up? I mean, I've made books, but all the time I'm making them, I'm enjoying the process very much, but thinking that it's a waste of time. That it's just going to wind up sitting there and add to the vast number of things I have. And if I'm lucky to sell a book for X, whatever, that's fine. But I'm trying to jive the two together. I'm creating yet one more thing in my house that I don't need. It's a creative process. It's supposed to be something you see in a bookstore that has a number attached to it, $65, $22. How do you divorce yourself from that?
The answer is you make the thing for you. Like, I've often thought about this. You make the thing for you like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited this exists. If somebody else made it, I would be equally excited that this exists. But it's even more exciting that I made it. Then the other half of that is, especially with books, because you can make so many of them and just disperse them, It's amazing when you get feedback from other people who connect with that thing. I've gotten a lot of emails, or somebody orders your book, like I said, from Australia, and it was like, oh, I found out about you. I'm willing to pay a ton of money and get this in Australia. Or somebody told me how much they liked this one band's song, and that turned them on to All Music Forever. And they were living in Louisiana, and they didn't have access to music outside of like kind of their religion. And they heard one song by one band in here, and in that song called Losing My Edge, the singer lists a whole bunch of other bands at the end of the song. And this guy who wrote me this email, who got the book, said, hey, here's what that band means to me. I heard that guy say all those things at the end of that song for a few months, and it was some of the first like secular music that I got to hear. And it took me months before I realized all those things he was saying were other bands. So then I had like a map, and I could go and listen to all those other bands, and that splintered me off to hear all of the rest of music that I was never kind of allowed to hear. And he's like, so your book really means a lot to me because they mean a lot to me, and thank you. So like, who wouldn't like hearing that after you made this thing? So really it's like good feedback from other people who connect with the thing you make. Okay. Does it, I think.
Cultural philanthropy.
Yeah.
Yes.
How come you made such few copies of the books, and should I say also sold them for just, you know, not much more than you said it costs for you to make them? Did you ever think about like going a different direction, more books, or pricing higher?
Yeah, like I screwed up with I don't know, I screwed up. It was difficult to not make more than 10 of that one because I didn't think somebody would pay that amount of money for one book. And I didn't yet figure out like, how do I make that book special with something unique attached to the book. But even with this recent one, I made about 600 copies of this book, and I still have copies of that book. But it's part of the process when you make books is that it's going to take you a year maybe to sell those books and go to book fairs and promote very heavily and try and find all sorts of avenues just to get that book to somebody. And it's truly a job because it's not so much, oh my gosh, I want that money back and I need to at least break even, etc. I mean, that is a part of it. But it's more like, depending on where you store your books, if you look over your shoulder in your office and you're like, oh, look, it's all the books I didn't sell. That is the worst. They will physically haunt you. And then you've got these books and you're like, well, I don't really want to make another book yet because I still got these to push out. And most people will never sell all of the books that they make. You have a bunch of overstock and then you've got to move on to the next book, and that's just the way it is. But it's difficult. It's really like you've got to steel yourself. I hired a press person for that DFA Records book. I'd never hired somebody to do press, and she did a great job. But in my brain, I was hoping like, oh, maybe there's one viral post that makes these all fly out the door. One person shares this loudly enough that it happens, which can happen. It didn't happen. It was just a slow process of selling books. So it's just difficult. It's just not even, it is difficult, but it's just part of the process to sell the books.
Thank you. Anyone in the back? I'll come back.
Hi, Tim.
Hey.
First of all, I think you're really incredibly flexibly creative in a lot of different areas. But two questions. I have a background in working for creative directors at book companies. Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought in this transition, did you go through that phase? Did you want to work? Have you worked for book publishing companies like Random House?
I haven't worked for anybody. I haven't done anything like that. I kind of just make up things small and kind of see where they go, and that's kind of where it's progressed.
Because it's very creative.
Thanks.
Now, the other question, did you get into any hot water with, I love the concept, mm-hmm. and I love your creative inspiration, where it came from, the comic book mm-hmm. series. Did you get into any copyright hot water with that?
I almost...
Any copyright issues with making the work with the comic books?
I so want to call a former speaker up on stage. Eric McNatt would absolutely have the very clear and definitive answer on that. No, because I only made 10 books. And I think that the image, I'm going to keep looking over at Eric, I think that the image obscures enough of the original image to create a different context for that. I have made individual prints of that, but not too many. But I think legally it doesn't interfere. I do have, I have employed a lawyer for different projects. The DFA book, the one right here we've been talking about, here's some good free advice that wasn't free to me, but I'm going to share it with you. A book, you're making a book, you sell a book. The interior of the book falls under the laws of magazines and newspapers, where you don't need to get rights cleared and things like that for the bands and things that I photographed that are inside the book. The cover, if I wanted to put a picture of someone on the cover of the book, I need to get their permission, because the cover of the book is considered advertising for the inside of the book. So I actually went through a few permutations with Farida, who was designing that cover, and we were working on things, and I said I want it to be like this. I gave her some inspiration. I wanted this. And so one of them was just a silhouette of a guy from a band that's in the book, just literally his yellow silhouette put over that drum kit. And I ran it to the lawyer, and I said, hey, what do you think about this? And he said, I'm just asking you this kind of neutrally. He said, if somebody looked at that silhouette, based on the context of this book, would they be able to guess who that is? And I said, yeah. And he kind of left it at that. And I was like, okay, we're going to take that off of there. The person that I was putting on the cover is also litigious, I know from other experiences I've read about. So that's why, one of the reasons why, there is not a person on that cover. I like the cover, and I think it's actually more of a mystery because it's a record label. It's not about an individual person. But I do think about legal questions when I'm making books. Mm-hmm.
Was there a question in the back? Did I see a hand? Yes, I did. I knew I did. Hang on. All right, if you could speak up for the room. Thank you.
Well, what advice would you give someone who's just wanting to start making books?
Oh, that's a good question. That is from Farida, the person who designed that DFA cover.
Can you repeat the question?
I will repeat the question. She said, what advice would you give to somebody who's just starting to make books or wants to make books? I think most people know, I would assume, that you can make a zine pretty easily. And a zine doesn't have to be like, shoddy looking, looks like you knocked it out in 10 minutes, kind of punkish. It could have a little weight or heft to it. That book, the smaller one, the electronic music book that the guy in the north of England published, a little black and white book, is kind of a zine size, but it's on some really nice thick paper. And he worked with somebody who, an older couple, I believe, who had printed for years and years in his neighborhood, but nothing like this. And he went locally and worked with them to make books that size that were really pretty affordable. Also, I mean, I have mentioned blurb books once or twice. There are some other places you can go, but blurb is pretty good because you can make a single book or multiples or just one dummy copy. The standards, the sizes are rather standard. You know, like an 8 by 10 book is a standard size, and maybe they only offer 2 or 3. Or MagCloud, which is also owned by Blurb. I mentioned them for making kind of more magazine-y things. But just start out somewhere like that where you can make a one-off for yourself and see how it looks. That Istanbul book that's up on the upper left, there are, only 2 copies of that book. One for me and one for the person who was a friend who hosted me in Istanbul. Maybe I'll make a bunch more in the future, but for now, I just wanted it as a gift to her and her family for like letting me stay there, and one for me. And it was worth it. I put some other things in there, some ephemera I brought back to make it special. So I would start there. It's easy to get started, especially now. It was not easy. You could not do any of this 25 years or so ago. You would have to get a publisher to agree to it. It would be a whole giant process. You could do this all from your bedroom. I'll say one last thing to this, and then that'll be it. I don't want to go on forever. This book here I made during the pandemic called Environments. I made 25 copies of that book, and it was going to be expensive because they're expensive to make only a few copies. I waited until Blurb had a sale. Sale was like 40% off. And then I decided that every one of those 25 books is going to have a different cover, a different photo that was inside the book. But I had to do it in one day because the sale was ending at midnight that night. I don't remember how I did this, but I had to re-upload the same book content and a different cover and keep track of them 25 times all day to make that sale, to get those copies. And it was great because the book did sell out, and one of the things I was kind of able to promote was if you get this book, that cover is your cover. You're the only person who has that cover of that book. So that was yet another way to kind of work around a book that people might think was cost prohibitive. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.